She thought the bleeding man in her garden was just a victim, until his phone rang, and a cold voice on the other end bowed in fear to a Korean Mafia boss. Maya had been playing quietly among the flowers when she saw it. A dark-suited man collapsed near the fence, blood soaking into the soil. Her scream brought Serena running. One look at the sharp-featured stranger fighting for breath, and Serena's buried medic instincts snapped awake. She didn't know that saving him would drag her and her daughter into a brutal mafia war, or that the man bleeding in her garden was a predator far more dangerous than the night itself. Before the story begins, take a second to like and subscribe. You won't want to miss what comes next. The antiseptic scent of the private clinic was a sharp contrast to the metallic tang of blood that had filled Park Soo's lungs in the garden. He woke not with a start, but with a slow, predatory opening of his eyes, his mind instantly cataloging the hum of the heart monitor and the heavy weight of the bandages wrapping his torso. His last memory was a blur of emerald grass and the face of a woman, not a face filled with the frantic terror he was used to, but one of icy clinical focus. "You're awake," a voice murmured. It wasn't the woman. It was Kim, his second in command, standing shadowed in the corner of the sterile room. "The surgeons finished an hour ago. They said the field dressing saved your life. Whoever did it knew exactly how to pack a ballistics wound." Park Soo shifted, a hiss of breath escaping his teeth as the stitches pulled. He remembered her hands, dark, steady, and strangely warm against his cold skin. Even as he had drifted into the gray margins of death, he had noticed the way she moved. She hadn't fumbled. She hadn't screamed. She had worked with the muscle memory of a soldier. "The woman," Park Soo rasped, his voice a dry scrape of its former authority. "Who is she?" "Serena Daniel," Kim replied, stepping forward to hand him a tablet. On the screen was a grainy photo of her from a state ID database. No criminal record. A single mother. She works as a head pastry chef at a bistro downtown. Neighbors say she's quiet, keeps to herself, and is devoted to the daughter. Park Soo stared at the image. The woman in the photo looked soft, her smile aimed at the camera with a gentle warmth that didn't match the person who had saved him. He remembered her kneeling in the dirt, her eyes narrowed as she applied a tourniquet with a piece of her own daughter's jump rope. She was a lie, a masterpiece of domestic camouflage. A pastry chef doesn't know how to manage a tension pneumothorax with a ballpoint pen and a prayer, Park Soo said, his fingers tightening around the edge of the tablet. The sharp, aristocratic lines of his face hardened. "She fixed me, Kim. She did it in front of her child without dropping a single bead of sweat. We're looking into her background before she moved to this district," Kim assured him. "But boss, the Donovan faction is already whispering. They know you were hit. They're looking for where you fell." Park Soo didn't care about the Donovans yet. His world had narrowed to the debt he now carried, a weight more suffocating than the lead that had nearly stayed in his chest. In his world, a life saved was a life owned, but there was a flicker of something else in his chest, an itch of curiosity. He wanted to know what a woman with those hands was doing baking cakes in the suburbs. "I want her brought here," Park Soo commanded, the steel returning to his tone. "Sir, she refused to come with the extraction team. She said she had to take her daughter to school." Kim looked uncharacteristically nervous. She told the men that if they stepped on her lawn again, she'd show them exactly how she learned to stop a heart as easily as she restarted yours. A slow, dangerous smile pulled at the corner of Park Soo's mouth. It was the first time in years he felt a genuine spark of interest. She wasn't just a savior. She was a challenge. "Don't force her," he whispered, his eyes fixed on the photo of the woman who had seen him at his weakest. "If she won't come to the tiger will wait. But find out everything. Every debt she owes, every fear she has. I want to know exactly what it costs to buy the soul of the woman who brought me back from the dead." The morning sun glinted off the frost on Serena's driveway, but the warmth did not reach the interior of her kitchen. She stood by the window, her knuckles white as she gripped a mug of coffee, watching the 3 obsidian black SUVs idling at the curb. They had arrived at dawn, parked with mathematical precision, their tinted windows acting as one-way mirrors that stared back at her modest home. They were a scar on the suburban landscape, a silent declaration that the sanctuary she had built for Maya was no longer invisible. Maya sat at the kitchen table, poking at her oatmeal with a lingering sense of confusion. The child was young, but she wasn't blind. She remembered the man in the dark suit and the way her mother's hands had been covered in red. Serena caught her daughter's gaze and forced a practiced, softening smile, the kind she had used in field hospitals to keep the dying from panicking. "Finish up, baby," Serena said, her voice steady. "We're going to be a little early for school today." She walked to the front door, her posture shifting into the rigid, alert stance of a woman who had once navigated active war zones. When she stepped onto the porch, the door of the lead vehicle opened in perfect synchronization. Kim stepped out, looking polished and immovable in a charcoal suit. "Good morning, Miss Daniel," he said, bowing his head just enough to be polite but not enough to be subservient. "Mr. Park has instructed us to ensure your commute is uncomplicated. Tell Mr. Park that my life was uncomplicated until he bled on my hydrangeas," Serena replied, her voice dropping into a low, dangerous register. "I don't want your cars on my street, and I don't want your men near my daughter." Kim didn't flinch. "In our world, a life saved creates a vacuum, Miss Daniel. Debt must be filled with protection. Your name is now linked to his, and there are those who would use that link to strike at him through you." The weight of his words pressed down on her. She knew the language of power. She had seen how men like Park Soo operated, where every kindness was a strategic move and every gift was a golden chain. She looked back at Maya, who was now standing in the doorway clutching her backpack, her small fragile frame looking impossibly vulnerable against the backdrop of the massive armored vehicles. "I am not a part of his world," Serena stated, though even she could hear the lie in it. "You saved the head of the Park Syndicate," Kim said firmly. "Whether you like it or not, you are the most valuable asset he has. These men stay." Serena felt the familiar surge of adrenaline, the combat medic instinct that told her to fight or flee. But she had a child to consider, and the stakes of failing were higher than her own pride. She realized that Park Soo wasn't asking for permission. He was claiming her as a territory under his sovereignty. As she buckled Maya into their modest sedan, one SUV pulled out ahead of her and two followed behind, forming a military-grade escort through the quiet neighborhood. Every neighbor who peeked through their curtains saw the same thing. Serena Daniel, the quiet baker, was now moving under the shadow of a predator. The debt had been acknowledged, and as the motorcade rolled toward the school, Serena realized that the protection Park Soo offered was just a different kind of prison. The following afternoon, the air in Park Soo's private study was thick with the scent of expensive tobacco and the clinical sharpness of his own recovery. He sat behind a desk of polished obsidian, his chest tightly bound, staring at a thick manila folder that Kim had placed before him. Outside the tall windows, his security teams moved like shadows across the estate, but Park Soo's focus was entirely on the contents of the file. "The bistro was a dead end," Kim stated, his voice low. "Her employment records there only go back 3 years. She's a ghost before that. No social media, no digital footprint. But we found her original discharge papers under a maiden name she hasn't used since the girl was born." Park Soo flipped the page. A different photo stared back at him. It was Serena, but the softness he had seen in the garden was gone. In this image, her hair was cropped close to her skull, her skin was darkened by a desert sun, and her eyes held a 1,000-yard stare that chilled even him. There were no smiles for the camera here, only the grim resolve of a woman who had walked through hell and learned to like the heat. Serena Daniel was a chief medical sergeant in a special operations unit, Kim explained, pointing to a redacted line of text. "Decorated for valor. 2 tours in high-conflict zones." She wasn't just a medic. She was a combat specialist trained to keep assets alive in the middle of a crossfire. She didn't leave because she failed. She left because she was the only one left alive after a night raid in a valley that doesn't officially exist on any map. Park Soo traced the edges of the photo with a pale finger. He understood now why her hands hadn't shaken when she saw his blood. He understood why she had looked at his armed men not with fear, but with an analytical coldness. She had been measuring their distances, identifying their weak points, and calculating the most efficient way to neutralize them. "She's hiding," Park Soo murmured, a dark fascination lighting his eyes. "She buried the soldier to save the child." He thought of the jump rope tourniquet and the way she had ordered his men around on her lawn. She wasn't a victim of his world. She was a refugee from one just as violent. The scars on his own body were visible, mapped out in jagged white lines, but hers were deeper, etched into the very rhythm of how she walked and how she watched the door. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Kim checked his watch. "She's here for the meeting you requested." "She's alone, but our sensors picked up a concealed blade in her boot and a tactical flashlight in her bag. She didn't come to talk, boss. She came prepared to escape." "Bring her in," Park Soo said, closing the folder. When Serena entered the room, she didn't look at the luxury or the art. Her eyes swept the corners of the ceiling for cameras and mapped the exits before settling on Park Soo. She stood in the center of the rug, her feet planted shoulder-width apart, a perfect combative stance masked by her simple floral dress. "You've been digging," she said, her voice a flat, dangerous blade. "I don't like mysteries, Serena," Park Soo replied, leaning back, the pain in his chest a dull roar. "I wanted to know who really saved me. I expected a good Samaritan. I didn't expect a woman who has more confirmed saves under fire than most of my men have rounds in their magazines." Serena's jaw tightened. The domestic mask didn't slip, it vanished. For a heartbeat, the quiet baker was gone, replaced by the sergeant who had survived the desert. "That woman is dead. I buried her so Maya could have a mother who doesn't smell like cordite and ash. If you bring that world back to my doorstep, Park Soo, I won't just save you next time. I'll ensure there's nothing left to fix." Park Soo felt a thrill he hadn't experienced in years. He didn't see a threat, he saw a mirror. "You can't bury what's in your blood, Sergeant. And right now, the people hunting me are looking for any weakness. They think you're a baker. I know you're a weapon. Which one do you think will keep your daughter alive when they come back?" The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of truths they both knew. Serena didn't blink, but for the first time, a flicker of shared understanding passed between the Mafia boss and the soldier. The debt wasn't just about money or protection anymore. It was about the ghosts they both carried. The following week, the silence of the Daniel household was replaced by the arrival of packages that looked like they belonged in a high-end department store rather than a two-bedroom cottage. It started small, a box of imported Korean chocolates left on the porch, but by Thursday the repayments had escalated into a psychological siege. Serena came home from her shift at the bistro to find Maya sitting on the living room floor, her eyes wide with a wonder that Serena hadn't been able to provide in years. Spread across the rug was a professional-grade violin case, its velvet lining cradling a wood-grained instrument that glowed under the lamp. Beside it sat a high-end tablet and a stack of books on advanced music theory. "Look, Mummy," Maya chirped, her fingers dancing over the strings. "A man in a suit brought it. He said a friend of yours wanted me to have the best because I was so brave in the garden." Serena felt a cold, sharp spike of ice pierce her chest. She recognized the friend, the predator who was now using her daughter's innocence as a tactical entry point. Park Soo wasn't just offering gifts. He was identifying the gaps in Serena's life and filling them with his own influence, making himself the architect of Maya's happiness. "Maya, honey, we talked about this," Serena said, her voice tight as she set her bag down. "We don't take expensive things from people we don't know." "But he said he knows you." Maya's face fell, the light in her eyes dimming into a pout of defensive confusion. "He said you saved his life and this is just a thank you. Why are you mad? You always say we can't afford the lessons at school, but now I can practice at home." The rift opened in that moment, a jagged line drawn in expensive maple wood and silicon. To Maya it was a fairy tale, to Serena it was a bribe. She could see the trap clearly. If she took the violin away, she was the villain in her daughter's story. If she let her keep it, Park Soo owned a piece of their home. Serena walked to the window and saw the black SUV idling at the end of the block. She didn't call the police. She knew they wouldn't come for a man like Park Soo. Instead, she waited until Maya was asleep, clutching the new tablet like a treasure, before she stepped out onto the porch. The driver's side window of the SUV rolled down. It wasn't Kim this time, but a younger soldier who looked at her with a mixture of wariness and respect. "Take it back," Serena said, her voice a low, lethal hum. "Mr. Park said you would say that," the man replied, handing her a small, handwritten note through the gap. Serena opened it under the porch light. The calligraphy was elegant, the ink dark and decisive. "A soldier knows that morale is as important as ammunition," it read. "She has talent. Do not stifle the girl's future because of your pride, Sergeant. This is not a debt. It is an investment in a life worth living." Serena crumpled the note in her fist. He was playing with her, using the very normal life she had fought to build for Maya as leverage. By providing the things Serena's modest salary never could, he was slowly turning her daughter into a hostage of his generosity. The next morning, when Maya woke up early to practice the violin, the music was beautiful, haunting and clear. But to Serena, every note sounded like a countdown. She realized that Park Soo wasn't just protecting them anymore. He was colonizing their lives, and Maya was already falling in love with the shadow he cast. The scent of yeast and caramelized sugar usually acted as Serena's sanctuary, a fragrant barrier between her past and her present. But as the afternoon sun hit the front window of the bistro, the air felt unnervingly thin. Her combat-honed instincts, the ones she had tried so desperately to drown in flour and butter, were screaming. She had noticed the silver sedan idling across the street 3 times in the last hour. It wasn't one of Park Soo's. "Serena, you're overkneading the brioche," her manager teased, passing by with a crate of lemons. Serena didn't smile. She wiped her floured hands on her apron and looked toward the back exit, calculating the distance to the heavy steel door. The piece shattered with the sound of a brick through the front glass. Shards of industrial-grade windows sprayed inward like diamond dust. Before the staff could even scream, 2 men in heavy leather jackets vaulted through the jagged frame. They didn't head for the cash register. They headed straight for the kitchen. Straight for her. "Everyone down. Now!" Serena barked, her voice snapping into the authoritative roar of a chief medical sergeant. She grabbed a heavy rolling pin in one hand and a chef's knife in the other, sliding behind the stainless steel prep table as the first man reached the swinging kitchen doors. He was fast, but he was sloppy, an enforcer, not a soldier. As he lunged, Serena didn't retreat. She stepped into his guard, the rolling pin connecting with his temple with a sickening crack. He went down, but the second man was already leveling a suppressed pistol at her chest. "Message from the Donovans," the man sneered, his finger tightening on the trigger. "You're the one he likes, right? Let's see how he likes you broken." A sudden deafening roar of an engine drowned out the chaos. A black SUV didn't just stop outside. It breached the storefront, jumping the curb and slamming through the remains of the entrance. The shockwave of the impact sent the gunman stumbling. In the heartbeat of silence that followed, Park Soo stepped out of the vehicle before it had even stopped rocking. He looked like a god of war carved from obsidian. He didn't wait for his guards. He moved with a cold, terrifying grace, his own weapon drawn and aimed with surgical precision. A single muffled thud echoed through the bistro. The gunman's shoulder exploded in a spray of red, and he collapsed, his weapon clattering across the tile. Park Soo didn't look at the wounded men. He strode into the kitchen, his gaze scanning Serena from head to toe, looking for the slightest sign of damage. He found her standing over the first attacker, her knife held in a professional reverse grip, her eyes burning with a fire that belonged on a battlefield, not a bakery. "You're late," she rasped, her heart hammering against her ribs, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of a ghost she had tried to lay to rest. "I apologize," Park Soo replied, his voice eerily calm despite the carnage behind him. He stepped closer, reaching out to brush a stray smudge of flour from her cheek. His touch was possessive, a silent claim made in front of his enemies. "I told you, Serena. Your life is linked to mine now. They won't stop at bricks and glass. They know you are the only person who can keep me alive, and that makes you the only person who can truly hurt me." Serena looked at the ruined bistro, her sanctuary destroyed, and then back at the man who had saved her. She realized with a sinking dread that the warning shot wasn't meant to kill her. It was meant to draw her out, to force her to choose between the mother who baked bread and the soldier who knew how to kill. "Maya," Serena whispered, the knife trembling in her hand for the first time. "She is already at the estate," Park Soo assured her, his hand moving to the small of her back to guide her toward the SUV. "The suburbs aren't safe for you anymore, Sergeant. It's time to come inside." As she let him lead her away from the wreckage of her normal life, Serena realized the warning shot had hit its mark. The quiet life was over. The war had begun. The walls of Park Soo's estate were reinforced steel and concrete, but to Serena, they felt like the glass of a specimen jar. 3 days had passed since the bistro was leveled, and the tension in the air was a physical weight, thick enough to choke. Maya was currently in the sun-drenched atrium, her new violin tucked under her chin. She was playing a simple folk melody, the notes dancing through the vaulted ceilings, oblivious to the men with submachine guns patrolling the perimeter just beyond the soundproof glass. Serena stood on the mezzanine, her eyes never leaving her daughter, while Park Soo stood a few paces behind her. He was watching both of them. "She's getting better," Park Soo remarked, his voice a low vibration. "The instructor says she has a natural gift for rhythm." "She has a gift for peace," Serena countered, not turning around. "A gift you're turning into a target." "I am the shield, Serena, not the target." The argument was cut short by a sound that Serena's lizard brain recognized before her conscious mind did. A muffled crump of a perimeter breach. Then the power failed. The atrium, usually a sanctuary of light, was plunged into a haunting twilight as the emergency red lights flickered to life, casting long bloody shadows across the floor. "Kim! Status!" Park Soo barked into his comms, drawing his weapon in one fluid motion. "They're inside the North Gate, boss. They used a signal jammer and..." The radio dissolved into static. "Maya!" Serena screamed, leaping over the mezzanine railing. She hit the ground in a tactical roll, her civilian dress tearing as she scrambled toward the atrium floor. The glass ceiling above them didn't just shatter. It exploded. Rappelling lines dropped through the jagged holes as dark figures descended like spiders. The first burst of gunfire wasn't aimed at the guards. It was a suppressive spray meant to cause chaos. Maya screamed, dropping her violin. The instrument hit the marble with a sickening crack, the wood splintering as she dove beneath a stone bench. "Stay down!" Serena yelled, sliding across the floor to reach her. She grabbed a discarded handgun from a fallen guard, her movements a blur of lethal efficiency. She fired 3 shots, 3 hits, neutralizing a repeller before his boots even touched the ground. Park Soo was a whirlwind of controlled violence on the stairs, providing cover fire, but the attackers were relentless. They weren't here to kidnap. They were here to liquidate the park line. "Serena, the service tunnel. Take her and move." Park Soo shouted over the deafening rhythm of the firefight. Serena reached the bench and scooped Maya into her arms, shielding the girl's small body with her own. But as she turned to run, a flash of movement from the shattered balcony caught her eye. A sniper, positioned high in the rafters, leveled his barrel. "No!" Serena pivoted, trying to put her own back to the line of fire, but the gunman pulled the trigger. The bullet didn't find Serena. It grazed the stone pillar, shattering a decorative urn, and a jagged shard of heavy ceramic flew outward like shrapnel. Maya let out a sharp, breathless gasp. Serena felt the girl go limp in her arms. Pulling back, she saw the dark stain spreading rapidly across Maya's white dress. Not from a bullet, but from the razor-sharp shard that had sliced deep into her side. The world went silent for Serena. The gunfire, the shouting, the smell of ozone. It all vanished, replaced by the terrifyingly fast rhythm of Maya's failing pulse. Serena dropped to her knees in the middle of the kill zone, her hands instantly pressing against the wound. "Look at me, Maya. Keep your eyes on Mummy." Serena's voice was no longer a mother's. It was the roar of a medic in a trench. Park Soo reached them, his face a mask of cold fury as he stood over them, his body acting as a human wall against the remaining attackers. He looked down and saw the blood on Serena's hands, the blood of the one innocent thing left in his world. Get them to the med bay, Park Soo commanded his remaining men, his voice vibrating with a promise of absolute extinction for whoever had done this. Serena didn't wait for the guards. She lifted her daughter, her face set in a mask of terrifying resolve. The safe life was dead. The baker was gone. As she carried Maya through the smoke and fire, Serena looked at Park Soo, and for the first time, their eyes held the exact same darkness. The transition from the estate to the mountain fortress was a blur of high-speed armored transport, and the rhythmic, terrifying beep of a portable heart monitor. By the time the massive iron gates of the Lion's Den, Park Soo's primary stronghold, ground shut behind them, Maya had been stabilized, but the silence she left in her wake was more deafening than the gunfire that had wounded her. Serena stood in the center of the fortress's command hub, a subterranean bunker of cold steel and glowing tactical screens. She hadn't changed her clothes. Her floral dress was stiff with dried blood, a macabre contrast to the high-tech surroundings. She looked less like a mother and more like a ghost seeking a reckoning. Park Soo moved through the room with a lethal, quiet energy, his voice a low snarl as he barked orders at Kim and a dozen other men. Maps of the city's industrial district were being analyzed by facial recognition software, and the air hummed with the collective intent of a predatory organization preparing for a cull. The girl is in the ICU wing. The best surgeons in the country are already there, Park Soo said, turning to Serena. His eyes were dark, shadowed by a guilt he hadn't expected to feel. You should rest, Serena. You've done enough. Serena didn't move. She didn't blink. She stepped into his space, her presence so cold it seemed to sap the heat from the room. I didn't come here for your hospitality, Park Soo. And I didn't come here to rest. This is a war zone now, he warned, his voice hardening. My men are handling the retaliation. You've seen what happens when you're near the flame. Your men are looking for a rival syndicate, Serena said, her voice dropping into the rasping, authoritative tone of the sergeant she had tried to bury. I'm looking for the man who pulled the trigger. I saw the way he held his rifle. I saw the insignia on his rappelling gear. He's not a common street soldier. He's a mercenary, someone who's worked the northern borders. Park Soo paused, his interest piqued despite his concern. He gestured for Kim to bring up the high-resolution footage from the atrium's breach. Show her. Serena leaned over the console, her fingers flying across the keys with a muscle memory that hadn't faded after years of baking bread. She froze a frame of the descending assassin, zooming in on a small faded tattoo on the man's forearm. A jagged lightning bolt crossed by a blade. Viper Unit, she whispered, the name tasting like ash. They don't work for the Donovans unless the price is high enough to buy a small country. They're the reason my unit was wiped out 5 years ago. This isn't just your war anymore. She looked up at Park Soo, her gaze as sharp as the scalpel she had used to save him. You want to find the people who hurt her? You need me. I know their patterns. I know where they hide when the job is done. Your men speak the language of the streets, but I speak the language of the men who just turned your home into a graveyard. The room went silent. The guards watched as the simple baker stood toe-to-toe with the most feared man in the city, demanding a seat at the table of violence. Park Soo saw the transformation was complete. The wall she had built between her two lives had crumbled, and what remained was the most dangerous ally he could ever hope for. If you do this, Park Soo said, his voice a low, heavy promise, there is no going back. You won't be a guest. You will be part of the blood I shed. Serena reached out, her hand steady as she took a sidearm from the table and checked the chamber with a practiced flick of her wrist. The blood is already on my hands, Park Soo. Help me find them or get out of my way. Park Soo nodded slowly, a dark, respectful smile touching his lips. He signaled to Kim. Give her a tactical headset and full access to the grid. The sergeant is lead on the strike team. As Serena turned back to the screens, her eyes reflected the cold blue light of the digital maps. She had entered the Lion's Den not as a victim, but as the hunter she was always meant to be. The warehouse district was a labyrinth of rusting corrugated steel and rotting timber, a place where the city's secrets went to die. Rain slicked the pavement, reflecting the flickering neon of a distant shipping yard. But inside the command van, the only light came from the blue glow of tactical HUDs. Serena sat flanked by Park Su's elite enforcers, her silhouette sharp and uncompromising. She was no longer wearing the floral dress. She was clad in tactical charcoal gear, a plate carrier cinched tight over her chest, and a headset resting against her temple. "The Donovans think we're coming for the front gate," Serena said, her voice a calm, rhythmic pulse over the comms. She pointed to a thermal heat map of Warehouse 14. "That's where they've stacked their heavy hitters. But the Viper mercenaries, the ones who hit the estate, they don't stay with the pack. They're positioned on the rafters of the loading bay, northeast corner. They're expecting a frontal assault. We're going to give them a ghost story instead." Park Su sat across from her, his eyes fixed on her face. He hadn't said a word in 20 minutes. He was watching the way she commanded his men who usually only took orders from him, and how they obeyed her without hesitation. There was a lethal clarity in her eyes that mirrored his own, a shared language of shadow and iron. "On my mark," Serena whispered. "Teams Alpha and Bravo, initiate the breach at the secondary vents. Low light only. If you see the lightning bolt tattoo, don't aim for the limbs. Aim for the center mass." The strike was a masterpiece of surgical violence. While Park Su's diversionary team detonated a flashbang at the front entrance, Serena led the primary element through a forgotten maintenance shaft. She moved with a fluid, terrifying grace, sliding through the shadows like a wraith. When they reached the catwalks, she didn't hesitate. She spotted the first mercenary, the man with the lightning bolt on his neck, peering through a scope at the distraction below. Serena moved behind him, her movements silent, the air barely displaced by her passage. Before he could turn, her blade found the gap in his armor with clinical precision. She lowered him to the floor without a sound, her expression as detached as if she were frosting a cake. "Target neutralized," she murmured into the mic. "Clear the floor." Below, the warehouse erupted. Park Su entered through the main bay, his weapon a rhythmic thunder. But it was Serena who acted as the unseen reaper from above. She coordinated the crossfires, calling out enemy positions seconds before they could fire. When the rival boss, Michael Donovan, tried to flee toward a waiting car, Serena dropped from the rafters, landing with a heavy thud on the hood of his vehicle. The glass shattered under the impact. Donovan stared up at her, paralyzed by the sight of the baker, holding a suppressed pistol to his windshield. "You targeted a child," Serena said, her voice devoid of heat, which made it 10 times more terrifying. "In my world, that's a debt that can't be paid in cash." Park Su arrived moments later, his boots crunching on the broken glass. He looked at Serena, then at the trembling man behind the wheel. He saw the way Serena's hand stayed perfectly still, her finger prepped on the trigger, waiting for the word. In that moment he realized she wasn't just his medic or his partner. She was the most dangerous weapon in his arsenal. "He's yours, Serena," Park Su said softly, stepping back to give her the floor. Serena looked at the man who had ordered the hit on her home. She thought of the splintered violin and Maya's blood on the marble. For a heartbeat, the soldier and the mother were one and the same. She didn't pull the trigger, not yet. She wanted him to see the face of the woman he had underestimated. "The Viper mercenaries are dead," she told Donovan. "And now your empire follows them." She handed the man over to Kim with a flick of her wrist, turning her back on the chaos. The mission was over, but the transformation was absolute. As she walked toward Park Su, the rain washing the soot from her face, she knew the garden gates had closed forever. If this story made you feel something, please like the video and subscribe to this channel for more. The sterile silence of the Lion's Den ICU was finally broken by the soft rhythmic scratching of a pencil against paper. Maya sat propped up against a mountain of pillows, a faint but healthy color returning to her cheeks. The bandages around her waist were hidden beneath a silk pajama set. Another gift from Park Su. But this time, Serena didn't feel the urge to throw it away. She sat by the bed, her hand resting on Maya's knee, watching her daughter draw a picture of the garden they had left behind. The heavy steel door slid open with a pneumatic hiss. Park Soo stepped in, his sharp features softening as his eyes landed on the girl. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket. His white shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, revealing the edge of the bandages from his own wound. He looked less like a phantom of the underworld and more like a man who had finally found something worth coming home to. "She looks stronger today," Park Soo said, his voice dropping to a warm hum that didn't startle the child. "The doctors say she can go for a walk in the courtyard tomorrow," Serena replied. She stood up, her movements still carrying the shadow of the soldier she had reawakened, but her eyes held a new, complicated peace. Maya looked up and beamed. "Mr. Park, look, I drew the violin. Mummy says we can fix it." Park Soo knelt by the bed, his large scarred hand gently patting Maya's hair. "We'll do better than fix it, Maya. We'll find the person who built it and have them make you one that sounds like the stars. For now, you must focus on getting better. Your mother and I have things to discuss." With a final smile for her daughter, Serena followed Park Soo out of the room and into the glass-walled corridor that overlooked the sprawling tactical hub of the fortress. Below them, the machinery of his empire continued to turn, but the atmosphere had shifted. The men moved with a different kind of discipline now, the kind that came from knowing they were led not just by a boss but by a partnership of steel. "The Donovan territories have been absorbed," Park Soo said, leaning against the railing. "The Vipers are gone. There is no one left who remembers the baker or the medic. To the world, Serena Daniel has vanished." Serena looked out at the monitors. "And what happens to the woman who is left? We can't go back to the cottage. We can't go back to the bistro. You've erased our life, Park Soo." "I've cleared the path for a new one," he corrected her. He turned to face her, the distance between them vanishing. He didn't look at her as a debtor or a subordinate. He looked at her as a mirror. "I told you before that I wanted to know the cost of your soul. I was wrong. You don't have a price. You have a purpose." He reached out, his fingers grazing the pulse point at her wrist. "Stay here. Not because you owe me for Maya's care, and not because I am holding you captive. Stay because the world outside is too small for a woman with your fire. I don't want a nurse, Serena. I don't want a shadow. I want a partner, someone to stand beside me as an equal in this family. I need your eyes on my back and your mind on my board." Serena looked at his hand, then up into the cold, dark depths of his eyes. She thought of the garden, the flower on her hands, and the constant, gnawing fear of being found. That fear was gone, replaced by a terrifying, exhilarating sense of belonging. She realized she wasn't just staying for protection. She was staying because for the first time in years she didn't have to hide who she was. "A partnership," Serena whispered, the word a blood pact in itself. "An empire," he countered softly. Serena placed her hand over his, her grip firm and certain. The mother had saved the child, the soldier had won the war, and now the woman would rule the peace. As they stood together overlooking the heart of the den, the silence between them was no longer a void, but the foundation of a new dangerous home. If this story made you feel something, please like the video and subscribe to this channel for more.